G'day, Ryan here. So today, gonna have a bit of a yarn about cryptoterrestrials being drawn or attracted to people with what they find to be interesting patterns of cognition, interesting mind states that are like magnets to them. Now, this can be through some kind of disorder sometimes. So, for instance, people with ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. So, people we would have said one stage had Aspergers, which is like high functioning autism, or autism itself. Nowadays, people talk about ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. People are on the spectrum. They could be, there's a massive amount of sweep across the spectrum with people that have high functioning autism that may manifest as poor social skills. In fact, that's what it normally manifests as. So poor social intelligence, sometimes bolstered with high levels of intelligence in other areas. And you can get extremes with savant, really kicking ass, logico-mathematical intelligence and really shitty social intelligence. You can get it manifesting like that in a lot of people. Some people just it manifests as shitty social intelligence without any perks, and then it cruises along, and people with extreme autism can't speak and can't communicate with the world, and but people with autism light, maybe you could call it, like Aspergers, it would have been called once, a high functioning autism way down the other end, often are just unusual people, awkward people, quite often with a specific, really nerdy interest that they're really focused on, which annoys the shit out of other people, makes neurotypical people that aren't neurodivergent, makes neurotypical people want to stuff them in lockers quite often. This is often an outcome of having Aspergers or something like that. You're always being stuffed in a fucking locker or something like that because you're fucking annoying, because you're always talking about the same shit and you can't modulate your behavior, and you can't read facial cues and social cues. You feel like you have been beamed down on an alien planet, and everyone else that has appeared has been given some manual on how to behave and what to do that they've memorized and they have in their subconscious, but you never got the manual. That's kind of what it feels like for a lot of people with ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. And then you have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is neurodivergence as well. So neurodivergence versus neurotypicality. So a neurodivergent person might have, autism, or might have ADHD or something like that. Neurotypical person will be more just the way most people are in society. And of course, everyone's an individual, and there's lots of shades and spectrums and all that kind of stuff. But people do tend to fall into these groups that are diagnosable as belonging to certain categories. Anyway, so when I was learning to be a primary school teacher, an elementary school teacher a while back, and then I worked as an elementary teacher, as a substitute teacher, or as we'd say in Australia, a relief teacher, or a CRT, casual relief teacher. I was that for a bit, working for an agency. You get the phone call saying, Johnny Red Muff can't, find his way to Terrence Heights Primary School at the moment, and he's got a stomach bug or whatever. You got to get there right now. You got to teach his grade 4 class, and you're like, okay, substitute teacher really sucked. I was no good at it, and I can't multitask. And as a primary school teacher, elementary school teacher, you really need to be able to fucking multitask. You got dudes, you're trying to do this. And you're like, you're showing Johnny something, and Mr. Musgrave, can you help me with this? And like, yeah, hold on a sec, Ralph. Hold on a sec. And then Jenny's saying, oh, Mr. Musgrave, I finished mine too. And you're like, everyone sit down, put your hand up if you need me. And all this kind of, it's just, I just couldn't handle it. But anyway, while I was learning, doing the course, the Graduate Diploma of Education in primary teaching, I learnt about, the different kinds of pedagogies recommended to teachers teaching children of different kinds of intelligences and minds, and with allowing for different kinds of disorders, etc., and so on. And when I came across autism, I was like, huh. So I have diagnosed in a very unprofessional manner some people with autism that I know. Some of those people have gone on to get professional diagnoses, and I was right. I also diagnosed myself, but I've never gotten a professional diagnosis. But I'd be quite surprised if I wasn't diagnosable by a psychiatrist as having ASD. It explains a lot about my life. Autistic people often do that kind of thing where they mask, where they don't necessarily have some kind of subconscious access to animalistic natural responses. When I say animalistic, I mean like human responses, but on an animalistic level where it's natural, seat of the pants. People are social creatures and they're picking up on cues, and from infancy they've been exposed to these things and they can reproduce them. People in a room are constantly measuring each other and working out things. They're not aware of themselves quite often, like neurotypical people whose brains are just on song, functioning well. With autistic people, like there's masking, what's called masking, which is where I'm not very good at picking up on those kinds of things necessarily subconsciously, so I have learnt, and not all autistic people have done this or can do this, but I've reproduced that kind of facility consciously, so that when I'm in a social situation, I am constantly consciously thinking about how to behave and how to manage my behavior and appear as neurotypical as possible without being odd, so that other people are more comfortable and so that I can move through the world with as little upset as possible. But it produces a large cognitive overload. So I can't maintain that for long periods. And then I'll have to crash, and I won't want to have anything to do with people for a very long time because I've had to mask. I've had to pretend to be something that I'm not. I've had to pretend to be, what many people would think was human, probably. Now, what I'm getting at here is, in my unprofessional opinion, there's a fair few genuine abductees, experiences, contactees, whatever you want to call them, that are on the spectrum, that I've diagnosed personally for whatever it's worth. But as I said, I have been backed up by professionals before, or I've diagnosed people and it turns out they get themselves officially diagnosed and are told yes. They present themselves, talk to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says, well, you are what we would call in the business an Asperger person. You can watch lots of movies and lots of soap operas and get used to how to behave in front of normal people. Or you could just not care. But not caring, it's easier said than done, And then you get someone like the fictional character, of course, but Sheldon from, Big Bang Theory. Autistic. Couldn't give a shit. Comes across as arrogant because of it. And it's like, you know, you're going to be considered a weirdo, or you're going to be considered arrogant. Are you going to pretend to be something that you're not, but still not get it quite right, so people think you're eccentric, odd? Or are you going to just not give a shit and just be yourself, and then people will say, oh, you just come across as arrogant then? So that's the dilemma of the Aspie, of the person with Asperger's, with sort of high functioning autism. Um, but yeah, so in my unprofessional opinion, Charles Hall, the dude's a fellow Aspie. I read his books, I watch his presentations. The guy is just dripping with ASD, Autistic Spectrum Disorder. Dan Crane. I watch that dude and I can see a brother. I can see the cognitive processes happening in his mind as he's talking. I recognize him as a fellow Aspie. I don't know if he's ever been officially diagnosed, or if Charles Hall has, but I'd bet my left nut that those two dudes are diagnosable with autism, with sort of autism light, you might call it. Aspergers would have been called at one stage. High functioning autism. So they come across as being functional and normal in society to a certain extent, but they've got poor social intelligence. And then both of those dudes also have, like high singing fucking logico-mathematical intelligence. I have certain aspects of high intelligence that are very slim slivers. I have poor social intelligence, except where another aspect of my mind has been able to be conscious about creating and reproducing what subconscious mind in a neurotypical person would be engineering. So that's some kind of intelligence in itself. Like I'm utilizing a different part of my mind because I'm lacking in another part because it's busted, my mind's not quite right, I suppose, compared to neurotypical stuff. But it also can and does allow for a certain kind of high level of intelligence in specific areas, And I think the Cryptoterrestrials are very, very interested in people that are neurodivergent, Homo sapiens that are neurodivergent. One thing about a lot of people with Asperger's, not all people I don't think with Asperger's, and everyone's an individual, but a lot of people have a very strong, what's the word I'm looking for? They abide very closely and strictly to truth, to right and wrong, to truth and falsity, and they don't lie. Or they very rarely lie. It's incredibly uncomfortable to them to lie. I have that. I believe that Dan Crane or Dan Burish has that when I'm watching him and I've read stuff he's written. I can sense that from him. Charles Hall as well. Wrapped up, obsessed almost with the idea of an absolute truths rather than, like I've said fucking 100,000 times before, rather than cultural truths or social truths, being less inclined to go under with social truths because you cannot lie, you will not lie. So it forces you to go down channels that to a neurotypical person, neurotypical people lie all the fucking time. They're always lying. Little white lies, big lies. It's like part of social cohesion. It's necessary in that world, in the world of neurotypical people, for their social cohesion, that they're lying to one another all the time. They're pretending this, little lies, so as not to hurt people's feelings. You do a bit of a dance, you do a song, you do certain phrases, you speak in cliches, you say certain things, and you keep everyone okay and stuff like that. That kind of thing I find really difficult to do. It's hard to do. I have to be conscious of it, and it feels really false as well when I'm doing it, because in the end I'm just interested in what's actually going on. And you could argue that what actually, social truths and social realities are somehow real. Okay. I think, as I've said in the past, that it's important that most people in a tribal group or in some kind of collective of Homo sapiens, it's important that most people are what is called neurotypical, that their minds are functioning in those kind of social ways quite well. And they're sort of jacks of all trades. They have, medium to good intelligence in lots of different areas, and they're just sort of, and there's this cohesive unit. But I think it also is important, and it has been for all time. I think it's probably a natural thing for a certain percentage of the population to be ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, and probably ADHD as well, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Those people probably make good warriors. Anyway, I won't get into the ADHD side of things, but there's like different kinds of people that fulfill different roles in a functioning society, and have probably always been there. And you can call them disorders, but they're not really disorders because you really need a small amount of certain people. So you need a small amount of people with autism in your society, because they are the inventors. They are the people that can look outside the box, go against the norms, and not swayed by cultural truth and social truth as much. Are more focused on some kind of what they perceive to be, anyway, absolute truth. Got the window open. Normally I wouldn't, but it's pretty hot, so a bit of oxygen. Anyway, so what you get anyway, to make a long story short, which is a bit too late probably, but Cryptoterrestrials, in my opinion, are very interested in people with ASD. Autistic people. Now, is it because they make better tools and are more functional in certain ways when it comes to sort of like sophisticated, high-level intelligence in very specific areas where they can utilize them, or is it more to do with these people being less swayed by cultural and social truths? I mean, some people with Aspergers aren't. I mean, like I was saying before, everyone's an individual, but there's a trend in people with Aspergers, from people that I've known with Aspergers, for them to be, in some ways, sort of antisocial. Other people with Aspergers are highly social because they like laws and strict regimes and things like that, and they just focus on that kind of thing. But I've known a lot of people that have Aspergers that are critical of society and of societal norms because they perceive it to be a lie, and they can't handle the idea of people speaking untruths. People saying it's a nice day when it isn't, but it is. It's a bad day, and not being able to get past that. No, it's a cultural truth. You say that to people, it's a greeting, and they go for the literal. Asperger's people going for the literal. Now, there's a possibility that the reason, okay, they may make good tools, as I said before. Asperger's people make good tools for the Cryptoterrestrials, but also I think what it is, perhaps, is that they are more like the Cryptoterrestrials. The Cryptoterrestrials think like people with ASD more. That autism for them is neurotypical. And they are more interested in associating with people that are on the spectrum because they see themselves and they see fellow people. To them, that's normal. And the old neurotypical order is a bit freaky to them in the same kind of way that it's freaky to me. Where I find neurotypical people, I call them muggles, after J.K. Rowling type of stuff. My family calls people that are sort of neurotypical, that don't display the more sort of autistic kind of methodologies and ways of thinking. We call them muggles, just because, you know, we're also interested in witchcraft and paganism and things like that, so it works there as well. Yeah, anyway, so the muggles basically is an alien world, an alien society that exists just out there that I am constantly interacting with. I feel like an outsider, as many people with Asperger's do. Again, I've never been clinically diagnosed with Asperger's. I diagnosed myself, and it's like, but as I said, if I don't have Asperger's, you know, I'd bet my left nut that I do anyway. So and feeling like you're on the fringe and the outside, you know, belong to the rest of society and have a different kind of thought process, you know, been accepted. You have to pretend and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is, I feel a huge affiliation with, what's the word I'm looking for? I identify with the Majeena strongly. And we meet here. We meet, I think, in part as people, as humans that do not belong here, just outside that wall. And so you could look at it any way you like, you know, they focus on and utilize people that are neurodivergent because they're easier to manipulate or control, because they already have a dissatisfaction or disassociation from neurotypical reality society. You know, it depends on how cynical you want to be, I suppose. Or they basically associate with us because we are more like them, and people are attracted to people that think like them. So anyway, there you go. So that's the spiel for now, and I'll catch you dudes later. Agus mór an time son éisteach is program seo ar sábist. Agus mór an céad míl time an whole duine id ceannach me leabhar cuideoch. Colach go bheith me leabhar id Amazon a dí an ó míanach ma. Agus hasin fucking gas de héin. Agus tapalíh. Gyda mahagaf. Slán. Yeah, something else I wanted to say was that another aspect of autism that I've talked to a few different people about, that I have myself and that other autistic people I've talked to have, is an intensity of emotion, like it's like your consciousness is, if you were to have the idea of an iceberg and a neurotypical person, an average person, normal person with a mind that doesn't have this disorder. You have this chunk of consciousness below sea level, and then you have a tip at the top that's the consciousness. There's all this shit going on underneath. With autistic people, the sea level is pulled back so that lots of elements of consciousness that would normally be unconscious are there in your mind, like noise, and you experience an intensity of emotion. Sharp, painful, blissful emotions that are overriding your senses. Stuff that you would normally, the people with a neurotypical mind would normally be processing below the line, and it wouldn't be affecting their emotional state to the extent. But what you have with autistic people is this exposure to drawn back, like the nerves are exposed to the light, to the air. an extreme kind of emotional bombardment, and a feeling of almost like you are an empath, almost like you are feeling the emotions of other people around you, being bombarded by them. This is something that I have, and that other people that that have Aspergers or high functioning autism have talked to me about as well. An extremely diverse, strong emotional life, which is interesting because a lot of neurotypical people assume that people with autism don't have emotions. They seem robotic, but they are experiencing a massive amount, like a torrent of emotions, or at least me and the ones of the others I've spoken to. But anyway, I just thought I'd slip that in there. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, I left a bit out. Generally speaking, I was going to talk about cryptoterrestrials being drawn to interesting thought processes, patterns of cognition, and that was going to be the first bit I talked about, the neurodivergent thing. But then also I was going to talk about, something which I'm not familiar with and I've never done, but psychedelics. So a lot of people who are interested in UFOs nowadays are interested in psychedelics. In fact, I think for a long, long time, both of those things have coincided to a certain extent. Because I think people on psychedelics, on psilocybin and similar like mushrooms and on peyote and things like that, with these kinds of substances, they experience otherworldly beings, and sometimes they hallucinate or not actually see, perhaps, or perceive in their mind, in some kind of telepathic contact, otherworldly beings, non-human entities, perceived non-human entities, etc. I've been, over the past year or so, I've been reading a bit of Terence McKenna and listening to his general orations online. The kinds of experiences he talks about having, I have had similar experiences myself, but not on psychedelics. I wouldn't do psychedelics because I think I'm kind of halfway there already. For people who, for most people, I think it's probably expansive to experience these kinds of things. The psilocybin in particular, from what Terence McKenna says, and others like him, early pioneers in exploring this kind of thing. And I've read a lot of Carlos Castaneda, and I know a lot of people think he was a charlatan and he was making the shit up. If he was making it up, I think he was probably basing it on a lot of true experiences though as well, and he was weaving it into some kind of narrative. But he probably shouldn't have gotten a master's or a PhD for it, or whatever the fuck he got, because it probably wasn't as legitimate as that. But nonetheless, there are a lot of truths in Carlos Castaneda's stuff, the Don Juan stuff, teachings of Don Juan, etc. I'm quite familiar with that kind of stuff. That's always been in the history of my family. I was sort of baptized in a lot of the Don Juan worldview, Carlos Castaneda peddled worldview, because my old man, my dad, was a big Don Juan fan, Carlos Castaneda fan when he was younger, when I was a little kid. But anyway, yes, cryptoterrestrials attracted to speculative thought, philosophical thought, interesting states of mind. If you are meditating, speculating, philosophizing, experiencing altered states of consciousness, perhaps due to drugs, you're a bit of a magnet to them. They will find that highly interesting. They may take an interest in you because of it. But and that it goes hand in hand. People that are naturally neurodivergent, or people that are neurodivergent because of the aid of substances such as psilocybin, open themselves up to cryptoterrestrial contact and drawing them in, just because they're so fucking interesting to them. As a well, some of it for them, I think, might be entertainment as well, general curiosity, but yeah, there it is. So cool. So I just thought I'd tack that on the end. I forgot that I was going to talk about that, but I have no experience with hallucinogens, psychedelics, and whatnot. So there it is. But it sounds like it's the kind of thing that would work to aid in attempts to contact them.